All right. Hello, this is David Tainter, journalism student at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, and I'm sitting here with Paul Clowder from the Star Tribune. And today we're talking about mass media ethics and the Washington Post's instance of planning meetings where they'd set up healthcare executives with Washington policymakers for a charge of $25,000 a plate. And Paul, do you want to just start off by maybe telling us a little bit about what you do at the paper?
Sure. I'm what they call the Metro editor. I supervise local news coverage for the Star Tribune, which means I have oversight over most of the reporters who are covering the news that appears in our Metro section and sometimes on the front page. I've worked at the paper for 29 years, and I've been a reporter for 11 of those, and I've been an editor for the last 18, much of that time in different management positions.
Now, maybe we'll try talking about these meetings from the Star Tribune's perspective, and is there anything in the Star Tribune's code of ethics that would suggest a conflict of interest in hosting a similar kind of event?
You know, the Star Tribune, I don't know that it has a written code of ethics that would embrace or address this specific kind of instance. I think the key issue for us would be, can we be involved in an event and still maintain our integrity and our credibility as a news organization? Sure. And I think a lot of this particular episode with the Post probably would have raised the same kinds of questions at the Star Tribune for the same kinds of reasons, but clearly there's a need for the business side of a newspaper and the newsroom to be able to work together, and whether it violates a code of ethics or not probably depends on a lot of the little details as they get worked.
Right, and speaking of that, how independently do the marketing department and newsroom operate at the Star Tribune?
Quite independently. The marketing department is on a different floor. We do have conversations with folks in marketing, but most of the time those are held between managers who are in a better position to kind of understand not only the newspaper's business needs, but also the newsroom's needs as a news organization. So until an idea gets sort of agreed upon, the contact is pretty limited, but it's between people who kind of understand each other's needs.
That makes sense. Now let's say, for instance, the marketing department approached you and other editors in the newsroom about hosting lobbyist events. How would the newsroom management respond, do you think?
You know, I'm not sure. I mean, in this case, I think we would have had the same concerns that were raised about the Post efforts. The idea of a marketing department coming to the newsroom and saying, could you sponsor an event that would involve lobbyists in this case, I think that would immediately raise some questions about, are we going to get involved in something that could compromise our ability to cover and report the news?
Right.
We don't want to be seen as for sale in the newsroom. We are striving to be objective. We want to maintain that objectivity throughout all of our business, whether it's in meetings, whether it's out covering stories. So I think it would be a pretty big red flag to proceed, but that's not to say that there couldn't be some kind of conversation that could maybe hammer out a way to do it that would satisfy the newsroom's need to be to maintain its ethical standards and still serve the interests of the business. We try to, we do try to do that whenever we can.
Now, given the loss of revenue in traditional newspapers, how tempting would it be to explore new business models, including events like we're discussing?
I think it's real tempting to explore new business models because we know that the traditional way of doing newspapering is not necessarily going to cut it anymore. But as we explore the new ways of doing things, we can't give away our franchise. And our franchise to the news side is our role as sort of objective, striving to be fair, balanced, and accurate in covering events that affect the way people live their lives. Can we get involved in sort of hosting debate or conversation between members of the community? I think that's something we've tried to do in the past. In fact, there was a trend that flared up in the 90s, and I think it's kind of simmered down, but the term public journalism got used a lot, where newspapers were trying to be more of a fomenter of debate, or at least discussion, without taking sides, without advocating. So we're definitely interested in trying new things, though, because the traditional ways of doing things isn't cutting it from the business standpoint.
Sure, and we know that these Washington Post meetings were supposedly off the record, and no public people would be allowed, or no press. if the meetings were on the record, would it present less of an ethical dilemma, do you think?
It would still depend on how it was set up, but I think it certainly would help. I mean, off the record implies a level of hiding or not disclosing what you know, and that I think invites suspicion on the part of readers. We should strive to be transparent. Having a session be on the record would certainly make it more palatable in terms of knowing that what was said and what took place could be fully reported. That's not to say that there still might be some questions about the event itself. Let's say it was sponsored by one particular big entity in a community, big business entity. You might want to make sure that you've understood what that means,
right,
even if the event is on the record. But on the record certainly takes away the appearance
sure,
of hiding what you know.
And how do you think the readers would react if the Star Tribune planned this kind of event?
Some readers probably wouldn't care and wouldn't necessarily get the distinction between what the business side of the newspaper is doing and what the news side of the business is doing. But I think our more astute readers, the ones who really pay attention to what's going on in the community, would definitely have some questions, and I'm sure we'd get a lot of criticism from some people for doing it.
Sure.
But I think a lot of the criticism could be muted or could be found to be valid depending on how you set it up. Clearly this is a concept that other media organizations are trying to do, and maybe some are doing it with a little less controversy and a little less ethical questioning than the Post ran into. I'm not familiar enough with those to know exactly how they work, but anytime a news organization tries new things, some people will notice, some people won't. The ones who do are generally the ones who are, your best, I would call them, your watchdogs as readers, because you want people to pay attention to what's going on in the paper, and it would remain to be seen if we would be able to pull it off in a way that satisfied our ethics.
Sure. Now you touched on this a little bit, but do you think there is a way for an ethical way for a newsroom to host a lobbyist event? And if so, what criteria would that have to meet?
I don't know if I can answer that without knowing more about the issue. The Post discussion talked about the idea of a firewall between the business side of the newspaper and the news side. That definitely exists in our newspaper as well. But I think that firewall also can serve as what I would call a membrane. Sometimes good ideas can come through from either side and can find a way to be done in an ethical, in a responsible way. And we need to have that conversation. We need to make sure it's a membrane that you can work through.
Sure.
Not everything should filter through, and clearly in the case of the Post, something filtered through to the news side that didn't smell very good. But I think there's a way to at least have the conversation, and quite often work something out. But I'd want to know more about, gee, what's the purpose? Why do you need to bring lobbyists together to talk about issues? Where is the newspaper's role in that? Are we trying to foster discussion that otherwise wouldn't happen? If that's a valuable thing for the community, then maybe we should take a look at it. But how you do that's getting a little bit out of my pay grade. Yeah.
All right, well, thanks very much for your time, Paul.
All right, thanks you, David.